Welcome, traveller, to this quiet corner of the internet where we explore the stories of Hallownest's inhabitants, where every character, from the mightiest knight to the humblest merchant, carries a tale worth telling, a history worth understanding, a tragedy or triumph worth remembering. Tonight, we will journey through the lives of every soul who walked the crumbling paths of this forgotten kingdom. And if these stories help you find rest, if the slow unravelling of their fates guides you gently into sleep, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. Not because I need the numbers, but because there are others out there, wandering in the dark like you, searching for these deep dives into the characters they love, and subscribing helps them find their way here. It helps the algorithm understand that slow, thorough, respectful explorations of character lore matter. But whether you subscribe or not, you're welcome here. The stories will unfold the same. Now, let your breathing slow, let your body sink deeper into comfort, and let us begin our journey through the lives of Hallownest's forgotten souls. Close your eyes now, and picture yourself standing at the entrance to Dirtmouth, that small town perched above the ruins of Hallownest, where the wind is cold and the sky is grey, and the few remaining residents speak in hushed tones of the kingdom below. This is where many stories begin, where travellers arrive seeking glory or knowledge or simply a place to rest, and this is where we will begin our exploration, with the characters who inhabit this fading town, who have chosen to remain when so many others have fled or fallen. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, let the tension drain from your body as we meet the first of Hallownest's inhabitants, as we learn their stories, as we understand what brought them here, and what keeps them in this place of ghosts and memories. Elderbug sits on his bench in Dirtmouth, the oldest resident of this nearly abandoned town, the only bug who remains from the days before the travellers came seeking the kingdom below. Elderbug is kind, is welcoming, is the first friendly face that most visitors encounter, and he offers advice and companionship to anyone who passes by. Though he knows little of the kingdom's true history, knows only that something terrible happened below, that the residents of Dirtmouth followed their dreams down into the well and never returned. Elderbug stayed because Dirtmouth is his home, because he has nowhere else to go, because even in this fading town with its boarded up houses and empty streets, there is something worth preserving, some sense of community and continuity that he refuses to abandon. Elderbug's story is small, is quiet, is the story of an ordinary bug trying to maintain kindness and hospitality in a world that has largely forgotten both. And when he greets the night, when he offers warnings about the sickly air below and wishes them well on their journey, there is a genuine warmth in his words, a desire for connection that transcends the tragedy surrounding him. Elderbug will remain in Dirtmouth throughout the night's journey, will be there to welcome them back each time they return to the surface, and his presence, his consistency, his simple kindness is a reminder that not every story in Hallownest is one of grand tragedy or epic failure, that sometimes the most meaningful stories are the smallest ones, the stories of those who simply endure. Cornifer the cartographer can be found throughout Hallownest, always in the deepest, most dangerous corners of each region, humming his distinctive tune as he maps the forgotten kingdom. Cornifer wandered off from his family the moment he hatched, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the world, a need to explore and document and understand that has defined his entire life. He married Iselda, and together they came to Hallownest, drawn by the mystery of this fallen kingdom, by the opportunity to map a place that had been lost to time and memory. Cornifer's dedication to his craft is absolute. He ventures into places of terrible danger, into the depths of Deepnest and the heights of Crystal Peak, into the flooded royal waterways and the overgrown Queen's Gardens, all to complete his maps, to document every corner of Hallownest before it is lost forever. His humming, that cheerful tune that echoes through dark corridors, is a sign of his presence, a beacon for lost travellers, and when the night finds him, Cornifer is always friendly, always eager to sell his maps and share his knowledge, always encouraging the knight to visit his wife's shop in Dirtmouth. Cornifer's story is one of passion and dedication, of a bug who found his purpose in exploration and cartography, who risks his life not for glory or wealth, but simply because he loves what he does, because mapping the unknown brings him joy, and his relationship with Iselda, the way she worries for his safety while supporting his dreams, adds depth and warmth to his character, reminds us that even in Hallownest, even in this place of death and decay, there are still relationships built on love and mutual respect. Iselda runs the map shop in Dirtmouth, selling the maps that Cornifer creates along with various mapping tools and supplies. Iselda used to be a fighter, was skilled in combat, but when she followed Cornifer to Hallownest, when his thirst for exploration led them to this fallen kingdom, she put down her weapon to enjoy a quieter life, to support her husband's work from the safety of Dirtmouth, rather than venturing into the dangers below. Iselda worries about Cornifer constantly, fears for his safety as he explores the most treacherous regions of Hallownest, and her dialogue reveals both her love for him and her anxiety about his dangerous profession. She is professional, is efficient in her business dealings, but there is warmth beneath her business-like exterior, a genuine care for her husband and a quiet strength that suggests she could return to fighting if necessary, that she has not forgotten her warrior past even as she has chosen a different path. Iselda's story is one of sacrifice and support, of a bug who gave up her own adventurous life to enable her husband's dreams, and while she sometimes expresses frustration or worry, there is never any doubt about her commitment to Cornifer, about the strength of their relationship, and when Cornifer finally returns to Dirtmouth after completing his maps, when he and Iselda are reunited, there is a sense of completion, of a journey finished, of two bugs who can finally rest together after their long separation. Sly is a merchant who can be found trapped in the forgotten crossroads, sleeping and snoring loudly, and when the night wakes him with the dream nail, he returns to Dirtmouth and opens a shop selling various items and charms. But Sly is more than just a merchant. He is the great nail sage, the legendary master of the nail arts who trained 3 disciples in the ancient techniques of nail combat. Sly is old, is small, is easy to underestimate, but he possesses incredible skill and power, and if the knight challenges him in Godhome, Sly reveals his true abilities, fighting with a speed and ferocity that belies his size and age. Sly trained Oro, Matto, and Shio in the nail arts, taught them the dash slash, the cyclone slash, and the great slash, and though his disciples have got their separate ways, Sly still thinks of them fondly, still hopes they are looking after themselves, still carries the pride of a teacher who saw his students master his techniques. Sly's story is one of hidden depths, of a character who appears to be nothing more than a greedy merchant, but who carries a legendary past, who was once one of the greatest warriors in Hallownest, and his presence in Dirtmouth, his survival when so many others have fallen, suggests a resilience and adaptability that has allowed him to endure where others could not. The nailsmith lives in a small hut in the City of Tears, dedicated entirely to his craft of forging and refining nails. The nailsmith is obsessed with perfection, with creating the ultimate weapon, and he offers to upgrade the knight's nail in exchange for geo and pale ore, each refinement bringing the nail closer to its perfect form. The nailsmith's dialogue reveals his passion for his work, his belief that a nail is not just a weapon, but an art form, a creation that reflects the skill and dedication of its maker. When the knight brings him enough pale ore to forge the pure nail, the nailsmith completes his life's work, creates the perfect weapon, and then steps outside his shop and asks the knight to kill him, to let him feel the strike of the perfect nail, to die at the moment of his greatest achievement. The player can choose to strike him down or spare him, and this choice determines the nailsmith's fate. If spared, the nailsmith experiences a crisis of purpose, wanders Hallownest searching for meaning now that his life's work is complete, and eventually finds his way to Nailmaster Shio's hut in Greenpath, where Shio teaches him that there are other forms of creation, other arts worth pursuing, and the two bugs develop a relationship, find companionship, and perhaps love in each other's company. The nailsmith story is one of obsession and redemption, of a bug who defined himself entirely by his craft and who, when that craft was perfected, had to learn that there is more to life than a single purpose, that creation can take many forms, that companionship and art and simple joy are worth pursuing even after one's greatest achievement is complete. Nailmaster Shio lives in a hut in Greenpath, surrounded by paintings and art supplies, having retired from the life of a warrior to pursue his passion for painting. Shio was one of the 3 disciples of the great nail sage Sly, and he mastered the Great Slash, a powerful horizontal strike that can hit multiple enemies. But Shio grew tired of combat, grew weary of the violence and the endless pursuit of martial perfection, and he put down his nail to pick up a paintbrush, to create beauty rather than destruction, to express himself through art rather than through battle. Shio is gentle, is thoughtful, is the most peaceful of the 3 nail masters, and when the knight visits him, he is initially reluctant to teach his nail art, preferring to discuss his paintings and his artistic philosophy. But eventually Shio concedes, teaches the knight the Great Slash, and expresses hope that the knight will use it wisely, that they will not become consumed by violence as so many warriors have been. If the nailsmith is spared, he eventually finds his way to Shio's hut, and Shio teaches him to paint, shares his passion for art, and the 2 bugs form a bond that suggests a romantic relationship, a companionship built on shared creativity and mutual understanding. Shio's story is one of transformation and peace, of a warrior who chose to lay down his weapon and pursue a gentler path, who found fulfillment in creation rather than destruction, and his relationship with the nailsmith, if it develops, is one of the few genuinely happy endings in Hollow Knight. A reminder that even in Hallownest, even in this place of tragedy, there is still room for love and art and simple contentment. Nailmaster Oro lives in a hut at the edge of Kingdom's Edge, a harsh and unforgiving location that reflects his personality. Oro was another of Sly's disciples, and he mastered the dash slash, a technique that allows the wielder to dash forward while striking. Oro is proud, is stern, is the most traditional of the 3 nail masters, and he demands payment before he will teach his technique, unlike his brothers who teach freely. Oro is respectful of the nail sage's teachings, but was reluctant to obey them to the letter, and there is a sense that Oro represents the warrior's path in its purest form, dedicated to combat and martial excellence without the artistic sensibilities of Shio or the warmth of Matto. Oro lives with his brother Matto, and the 2 can be fought together in Godhome, where they demonstrate their mastery of the nail arts in perfect coordination. Oro's story is one of dedication to tradition, of a warrior who has maintained his skills and his discipline even as Hallownest has fallen, who continues to practice and perfect his technique even though there are few left to fight, and his presence at the edge of the kingdom, in that harsh and isolated place, suggests a bug who has chosen solitude and discipline over comfort and companionship. Nailmaster Matto also lives in the hut at Kingdom's Edge with his brother Oro, and he mastered the Cyclone Slash, a spinning attack that strikes all enemies around the wielder. Matto is warmer than Oro, is more welcoming, and he teaches his technique freely to the knight, expressing joy at the opportunity to pass on his knowledge to a new generation. Matto speaks fondly of his time training under Sly, remembers the camaraderie of learning alongside his brothers, and there is a sense of nostalgia in his dialogue, a longing for the days when the three disciples trained together, when they were young and the world was full of possibility. Matto's relationship with Oro is complex. They live together in isolation, practice their techniques together, and can fight in perfect coordination. But there is also a sense of tension, a difference in philosophy and temperament that suggests their cohabitation is not always easy. Matto's story is one of brotherhood and tradition, of a warrior who has maintained his skills and his warmth even in isolation, who still finds joy in teaching and in the practice of his art, and his presence alongside Oro, the way they have chosen to remain together despite their differences, speaks to a bond that transcends personality conflicts, a loyalty to family and shared history that has endured even as everything else has fallen away. Lem the Relic Seeker has set up shop in a tall tower in the City of Tears, where he eagerly purchases ancient artifacts from the knight in exchange for Geo. Lem travelled to Hallownest from afar, drawn by the mystery of this fallen kingdom, by the opportunity to study its history and culture through the relics and artifacts that remain. Lem is passionate about his work, is fascinated by the stories that objects can tell, and his dialogue reveals a deep respect for Hallownest's past, a desire to understand and preserve what can be learned from the kingdom's ruins. Lem purchases wanderers' journals, Hallownest seals, king's idols, and arcane eggs, and for each type of relic, he offers insights into what they reveal about Hallownest's history and culture. Lem is one of the few characters who is not native to Hallownest, who came here as an outsider seeking knowledge rather than glory or redemption, and his perspective, his scholarly approach to the kingdom's tragedy, provides a different lens through which to view Hallownest's fall. Lem's story is one of academic passion, of a bug who risks the dangers of a fallen kingdom not for personal gain but for the sake of knowledge and understanding, and his presence in the City of Tears, his dedication to collecting and studying relics even as the infection spreads around him, suggests a commitment to his craft that transcends personal safety, a belief that preserving history and knowledge is worth any risk. Quirrell is perhaps the most beloved character in Hollow Knight, a wandering scholar who appears throughout the knight's journey, offering observations and companionship at key locations. Quirrell was Monomon the teacher's apprentice before the fall of Hallownest, and when Monomon became a dreamer, she entrusted Quirrell with her mask, which served as additional protection for her seal and sent him far from Hallownest, allowing him to live a life free from the burden of the kingdom's tragedy. Quirrell wandered for years, his memories of Hallownest fading, living a life of exploration and discovery, but eventually he was called back, drawn by some instinct or compulsion he did not understand, carrying Monomon's mask without remembering its significance. When Quirrell returns to Hallownest, he is fascinated by the kingdom, by its architecture and its history, and he appears at various locations throughout the knight's journey, always offering thoughtful commentary, always expressing wonder at the ruins around him. Quirrell is kind, is intelligent, is one of the few characters who treats the knight as an equal and a companion rather than as a tool or an obstacle, and his presence throughout the journey provides moments of genuine warmth and connection in an otherwise lonely exploration. When the knight reaches the archives, when it is time to break Monomon's seal, Quirrell is there, and he understands what must be done, understands that his teacher must die, that her eternal sleep must be ended, and he removes the mask, allows the knight to enter Monomon's dream, and accepts the necessity of her death with quiet grace. After Monomon's death, Quirrell can be found sitting by the blue lake, staring out at the water, and he speaks of feeling at peace, of having completed his purpose. And then he is gone, his nail left behind on the shore, and the implication is clear that Quirrell has chosen to end his own story, that with his purpose fulfilled and his teacher gone, he has nothing left to live for. Quirrell's story is one of the most tragic in Hollow Knight, not because of any grand failure or terrible crime, but because of its quiet sadness, because Quirrell is so kind and so thoughtful and so deserving of happiness, and yet his story ends in implied suicide, in a choice to let go rather than to continue living in a world that has lost its meaning for him. Cloth is a large cicada warrior who came to Hallownese seeking to prove her courage by defeating mighty creatures. Cloth is friendly, is enthusiastic, but she is also deeply insecure about her combat abilities, and her bravado often gives way to cowardice, leading her to hide underground or to flee from danger rather than face it. Cloth can be encountered at several locations throughout Hallownest, and each time she expresses determination to prove herself, to overcome her fear and become the warrior she believes she should be. Cloth's story culminates in the fight against the traitor lord in the Queen's Gardens, where, if the knight has encountered her at all previous locations, she appears to help in the battle, fighting alongside the knight with genuine courage and skill. After the traitor lord is defeated, Cloth is mortally wounded, and she dies expressing satisfaction that she finally proved her courage, that she finally faced a mighty foe and did not run away, that she died as a warrior rather than as a coward. Cloth's death is optional. If the knight defeats the traitor lord before encountering Cloth at all her locations, she survives and can be found in Dirtmouth, still seeking her moment of courage, still hoping to prove herself. But if she does fight the traitor lord, her death is inevitable, is the price of her courage, and there is something both tragic and triumphant about her end, about the fact that she finally overcame her fear, only to die in the moment of her victory. Cloth's story is one of self-doubt and redemption, of a warrior who struggled with cowardice and insecurity, and who ultimately found the courage she sought, even though it cost her everything. Tiso is an arrogant warrior who came to Hallownest seeking glory in the Colosseum of Fools. Tiso can be encountered at several locations on his journey to the Colosseum, and each time he is boastful, is dismissive of the knight, is convinced of his own superiority and his inevitable triumph. Tiso carries a distinctive shield that he claims conceals a deadly surprise, and he speaks of the Colosseum as the ultimate test of a warrior's skill, the place where he will prove himself and earn the glory he seeks. But Tiso's story ends in failure and death. He enters the Colosseum and is killed off-screen during one of the trials, and his body can be found later, dumped in the acid pits at the bottom of Kingdom's Edge, along with the other slain warriors, his shield broken, his dreams of glory reduced to nothing. Tiso's death is never shown, is never explained in detail, but the fact that his body is discarded like trash, that he is given no more respect or recognition than any other failed warrior, is a brutal commentary on the futility of seeking glory and hallowness, on the way the kingdom consumes those who come seeking fame and recognition. Tizo's story is one of hubris and failure, of a warrior who overestimated his abilities and paid the ultimate price, and his fate serves as a warning about the dangers of pride and the harsh reality of combat in a fallen kingdom. Zote the Mighty is perhaps the most divisive character in Hollow Knight, a self-proclaimed warrior who's actually completely incompetent in combat. Zote came to Hallownest to fulfill a promise of glory for himself, and he named his nail Life Ender because he believes names have power, but his nail is made of shellwood and cannot deal damage, rendering him completely harmless in battle. Zote can be encountered multiple times throughout the knight's journey, and each time he is in danger, trapped by weak enemies or in situations that any competent warrior could easily escape. The knight can choose to save Zote or leave him to die, and this choice has significant consequences for his story. If saved in Greenpath and again in Deepness, Zote appears in Dirtmouth and later in the Colosseum of Fools, where he becomes the final boss of the first trial despite being completely unable to fight, simply having to be attacked until the fight is over. If Zote is saved, he also appears in Bretta's dreams, where she has imagined him as the Grey Prince Zote, a powerful and heroic figure who is everything the real Zote is not, and the knight can fight this dream version of Zote multiple times, each iteration becoming more difficult and more absurd. Zote is arrogant, is delusional, is convinced of his own greatness despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, and he has created 57 precepts, rules for life that are often contradictory or nonsensical, that reflect his warped understanding of the world. Zote's story is comedic, is meant to be absurd, but there is also something sad about him, about the fact that he is so desperate for recognition and glory that he has constructed an entire false identity, that he clings to his delusions even when reality constantly proves him wrong. Zote survives not because of his skill, but because of the knight's intervention or sheer luck, and his presence in Hallownest. His survival when more competent warriors like Tiso have died is a dark joke about the arbitrary nature of survival in a fallen kingdom. Bretta is a timid bug who can be rescued from the fungal wastes, where she's been trapped and is slowly succumbing to the infection. When rescued, Bretta returns to Dirtmouth and moves into one of the abandoned houses, where she begins writing in her diary about her rescue and her growing infatuation with the knight, whom she sees as a heroic figure who saved her life. Bretta's story becomes more complex if Zote is also saved, because Bretta transfers her affections to Zote, seeing in him the heroic warrior she wants to believe exists, and she begins dreaming of him as the Grey Prince Zote, a powerful and romantic figure. Bretta's house fills with statues and drawings of Zote, and her diary entries reveal her increasingly elaborate fantasies about him, about their imagined romance and his imagined heroism. If the knight defeats the Grey Prince Zote enough times, Bretta becomes disillusioned with Zote, realizes that her fantasies do not match reality, and she leaves Dirtmouth, leaving behind a note expressing her desire to find her own path, to stop waiting for a hero, and to become her own person. Bretta's story is one of romantic delusion and eventual self-realization, of a bug who projected her desires onto others, and who eventually learned that she needed to define herself rather than defining herself through her relationships with others. And while her story is often played for comedy, there is genuine character growth in her arc, a movement from passivity and fantasy to agency and self-determination. Hornet is one of the most important characters in Hollow Knight, the daughter of the Pale King and Hera the Beast. born as part of the bargain that made Hera a dreamer. Hornet is called the gendered child, is alive in a way the vessels are not, and she spent only a short time with her mother before Hera entered her eternal sleep. Hornet was raised by the weavers of Deepnest, learned to fight with her needle and thread, and she has taken on the role of protector of Hallownest's ruins, testing those who venture into the kingdom to determine if they are strong enough to face the challenges ahead. Hornet fights the night twice, once in Greenpath and once in Kingdom's Edge, and both battles are tests, attempts to measure the knight's strength and determination. Hornet understands the situation in Hallownest better than most, understands that the seals must be broken, that the Hollow Knight must be faced, that the infection must be ended even if it means her mother's death is made permanent, and she guides the knight through cryptic warnings and challenges, pushing them to become strong enough to succeed where the Hollow Knight failed. Hornet is fierce, is independent, is one of the few characters who seems to have a plan, who is working toward a goal beyond mere survival, and her relationship with the knight is complex. They are siblings through their shared father, but Hornet is alive while the knight is a vessel of void, and there is a sense that Hornet sees in the knight both a potential solution to Hallownest's problems and a reminder of the terrible cost of the Pale King's plan, of the thousands of vessels that were created and abandoned. Hornet's story continues beyond Hollow Knight. She is the protagonist of the upcoming Silk Song, and her fate, her purpose, her understanding of what must be done to save or avenge Hallownest remains one of the most compelling mysteries in the game's lore. The knight, the player character, is a vessel, one of the thousands created by the Pale King and the White Lady in the Abyss, one of the few who survived the climb from the depths, and one who was not chosen, who was left behind when the Pale King selected the Hollow Knight. The knight escaped from Hallownest, wandered in the lands beyond the kingdom, and then returned, drawn by some instinct or purpose that even it may not fully understand. The knight is silent, never speaks, never makes sounds beyond the impact of its nail and the rustle of its cloak, and this silence is a manifestation of the void within it, the emptiness that defines the vessels. The knight is hollow, or as close to hollow as a vessel can be, and this hollowness is its strength, allows it to resist the Radiance's influence, allows it to do what the Hollow Knight could not. The knight's journey through Hallownest is one of exploration and combat, of gathering power and abilities, of facing the kingdom's greatest challenges and overcoming them, and throughout this journey the knight remains silent, remains empty, a vessel fulfilling a purpose it never chose. The knight's story is the player's story, is shaped by the choices the player makes, by which ending they pursue, by how they interact with the characters and challenges of Hallownest. And this flexibility, this openness, is part of what makes the knight such a compelling protagonist, because the knight is not a character with a fixed personality or motivation, but rather a vessel, in every sense of the word, through which the player experiences Hallownest's tragedy. The Hollow Knight, the chosen vessel, hangs in chains in the Temple of the Black Egg, suffering, failing, its shell cracked and leaking the Radiance's light. The Hollow Knight was selected by the Pale King as the perfect vessel, was raised in the White Palace, was trained and prepared for its purpose, and it was sealed in the temple with the Radiance trapped inside it. And for a time, the plan worked, the infection receded, and Hallownest had peace. But the Hollow Knight was not truly hollow. It had developed an idea instilled, a sense of self, a bond with the Pale King, and this tiny crack in its emptiness gave the Radiance a foothold, allowed her to corrupt the vessel from within, and gradually the Hollow Knight began to fail. The Hollow Knight's suffering is immense. It has been chained in darkness for years or decades, has been fighting a losing battle against the Radiance's influence, has been slowly breaking under the weight of a purpose it cannot fulfill, and when the Knight finally faces it, when the seals are broken and the temple door shatters, the Hollow Knight attacks not because it wants to, but because the Radiance compels it, because it has lost control. During the fight, the Hollow Knight stabs itself, drives its nail into its own body repeatedly, and this self-harm is the most heartbreaking aspect of its story, because it reveals that some part of the Hollow Knight is still trying to fulfill its purpose, is still trying to contain the Radiance, is trying to destroy itself to stop the infection, to save the kingdom even as it fails. The Hollow Knight story is one of the great tragedies of the game, because it was created for a purpose it could never truly fulfill, because it was doomed from the moment the Pale King chose it, because the flaw that caused its failure was not its fault, but the inevitable result of being raised and trained and given purpose, and its suffering, its decades of imprisonment and slow corruption, is the price of the Pale King's hubris, the cost of trying to solve the infection through sacrifice and containment rather than through understanding and reconciliation. The Pale King is the central figure of Hallownest's tragedy, the Worm who transformed into a bug-like form and founded the kingdom, who gave the gift of mind to the mindless creatures of the wastes, who built a civilization of white stone and pale light, and who ultimately failed to save it from the infection. The Pale King was powerful, was intelligent, was driven by a vision of an eternal kingdom where bugs could think and choose and build and create, but he was also proud, was unwilling to compromise, was convinced that his way was the only way, and when the Radiance began to spread the infection through the dreams of his subjects, the Pale King chose to fight her rather than to negotiate, chose to seal her away rather than to find a way for her to coexist with his kingdom. The Pale King created the vessels, fathered thousands of children with the White Lady, and cast them into the abyss to be infused with void, and most of these children died, their shells cracking, their forms dissolving, and the Pale King watched this happen, accepted this cost, because he believed that creating one perfect vessel was worth the sacrifice of thousands of imperfect ones. The Pale King chose the Hollow Knight, raised it in the White Palace, trained it for its purpose, and in doing so he created the flaw that would doom his plan, because the act of raising and training the vessel gave it an idea instilled, gave it a sense of self and purpose that made it not truly hollow. The Pale King also made a bargain with Hera, agreed to father a child with her in exchange for her becoming a dreamer, and thus Hornet was born, and this bargain reveals the depths of the Pale King's desperation, his willingness to create life and to sacrifice it, to make deals and to manipulate, all in service of his plan to save Hallownest. The Pale King's fate is unclear. He vanished before the Knight's arrival, and the White Palace was moved into the Dream Realm, hidden away, accessible only through the dreams of a dead Kingsmold. Whether the Pale King died or fled, or transformed into something else, the lore does not say, but he was gone, and his absence left Hallownest without leadership, without direction, and the kingdom fell into ruin. The Pale King's story is one of hubris and failure, of a ruler who believed he could solve any problem through intelligence and will, who created a plan that was flawed from the beginning, who sacrificed thousands of lives in pursuit of a solution that could never work, and whose legacy is a kingdom in ruins, a civilization destroyed by the very measures meant to save it. The White Lady is the Pale King's queen, the mother of the vessels, and she lives in the Queen's gardens, bound by roots, having chosen to restrain herself to prevent any more children from being born. The White Lady is filled with regret for what she and the king did, for the thousands of vessels they created and abandoned, for the hollow knight they condemned to eternal imprisonment, and she speaks to the knight with a mixture of hope and sorrow. Hope that the knight might succeed where the hollow knight failed, sorrow for the burden that the knight must bear. The White Lady understands that the vessels were a mistake, that the plan was flawed from the beginning, but she also understands that the knight is the kingdom's last hope, that if the knight fails, Hallownest is truly lost. The White Lady is one of the few characters who acknowledges the moral weight of what was done to the vessels, who expresses genuine remorse for the suffering that was caused, and her self-imposed imprisonment, her choice to bind herself to prevent more children from being born, is an act of penance, an attempt to ensure that no more vessels will be created, that no more children will be sacrificed to the Pale King's failed plan. The White Lady also gives the knight half of the king's old charm, the other half being found in the White Palace, and when these halves are united, the king's soul can be transformed into the Void Heart, the charm that allows the knight to unite the void and challenge the Radiance directly. The White Lady's story is one of complicity and regret, of a queen who participated in her husband's plan and who now lives with the consequences, who has chosen isolation and restraint as a form of atonement, and whose hope for the knight is tinged with the understanding that the knight, like the hollow knight before it, is being asked to bear a burden that no being should have to carry. Ogrim, known as the Dung Defender, is the most loyal of the 5 great knights of Hallownest, and he can be found in the royal waterways, where he has taken on the role of protecting the kingdom's waste systems and the memory of his fallen comrades. Ogrim is boisterous, is cheerful, is one of the few characters in Hollow Knight who seems genuinely happy, and he fights the knight not out of malice, but out of duty, out of a desire to test the knight's strength and to protect the area he has claimed as his territory. Ogrim was renowned for his bad scent, a consequence of his chosen domain, but this did not keep him from enjoying the company of the White Lady and his fellow knights, and he speaks of his past with fondness and pride, remembers the battles and adventures he shared with the other great knights, remembers the glory days of Hallownest when the kingdom was strong and the Pale King ruled. Ogrim has built a statue of the Pale King out of dung, and while this might seem disrespectful, it is actually a sign of his devotion, his belief that the king deserves to be remembered and honoured even in this humble form. Ogrim is one of the few characters who presents a positive view of the Pale King, who speaks of him as a protector and a leader worthy of loyalty, and while this view may be overly rosy, may reflect Ogrim's optimistic nature and his tendency to see the best in those he admires, it also suggests that the Pale King was capable of inspiring genuine loyalty and affection, that he was not purely the cold and calculating figure that much of the lore suggests. After the knight defeats Ogrim, he recognizes the knight's strength and allows them to pass, and he expresses hope that the knight will succeed in whatever quest they are pursuing, and there is a sense that Ogrim, despite his loyalty to the past, understands that the kingdom needs new heroes, that the old order has fallen, and that the future belongs to those who can face the challenges that the great knights could not. Ogrim's dream variant, the White Defender, can be fought multiple times, and each time Ogrim is cheerful and enthusiastic, treating the battles as friendly competitions rather than life or death struggles, and his joy in combat, his love of testing his skills against a worthy opponent, is a reminder that not all of Hallownest's warriors were driven by duty or desperation, that some, like Ogrim, fought because they loved the challenge, because they found meaning and fulfillment in the warrior's path. Dryia was another of the 5 great knights, and she served as the White Lady's protector, standing guard over the Queen's gardens. Dryia's fate is revealed through environmental storytelling. Her corpse can be found at the entrance to the White Lady's chamber, surrounded by the bodies of Mantis traitors, and it is clear that she died defending the White Lady, that she fought off numerous enemies before finally falling. Dryia's story is one of loyalty and sacrifice, of a knight who fulfilled her duty to the very end, who gave her life to protect her queen and her death. The way her body remains at her post even in death is a testament to her dedication and her courage. The White Lady speaks of Dryia with sadness and respect, acknowledges the sacrifice that was made, and Dryia's presence, even in death, serves as a reminder of the cost of Hallownest's fall, of the warriors who gave everything to protect what they loved and who died when their strength was not enough. Izuma was the 3rd of the 5 great knights, and she was known for her kindness and her connection to nature. Izma's grove can be found in the royal waterways, a small area of beauty and tranquility in the midst of the filth and decay, and Izma's tear, a charm that protects against acid, can be found there, suggesting that Izma had some power over or resistance to corrosive substances. Izma's relationship with Ogrim is hinted at through dialogue and environmental details, and it is suggested that the 2 knights were close, perhaps romantically involved, and Ogrim's continued protection of the waterways, his presence near Izma's grove, suggests that he remains there in part to be close to her memory, to honour her even in death. Izma's story is one of beauty and loss, of a knight who brought life and kindness to a harsh world, and who is remembered with love by those who knew her. Hegemol was the 4th of the 5 great knights, and he was known for his massive size and his heavy armour. Hegemol's fate is revealed through the false knight, a maggot who stole Hegemol's armour and used it to pose as a knight, and the implication is that Hegemol was killed, that his armour was taken from his corpse, and that he died alone and forgotten, his legacy reduced to a suit of armour worn by an impostor. Hegemol's story is one of the saddest among the great knights, because unlike Dryia, who died in battle, or Izma, who's remembered with love, Hegemol's death was apparently inglorious, was not witnessed or honoured, and his armour, the symbol of his strength and his status, was stolen and used by a creature who had no right to it, who wore it not out of respect, but out of a desire for power and recognition. Zema, known as the Grey Mourner, is the 5th of the 5 great knights, and she is the only one besides Ogrim who is still alive. Zema is not native to Hallownest. She came from Land Serene, a location outside the kingdom, and she brought with her the delicate flowers, rare and fragile blooms that cannot withstand violence or harsh conditions. Zema lives in the resting grounds, and she asks the knight to deliver a delicate flower to a grave in the Queen's gardens, the grave of her lover, and this quest is one of the most challenging in the game, because the flower will be destroyed if the knight takes damage or uses a stagway, requiring a careful and uninterrupted journey through dangerous territory. Zema's lover was a member of the traitor Mantises, and their relationship was forbidden, was opposed by both the Mantis tribe and presumably by Zema's fellow knights, and when her lover died, Zema was left alone, mourning a love that could never be fully acknowledged or accepted. Zema's story is one of forbidden love and eternal grief, of a knight who has outlived her comrades and her lover, who remains in Hallownest not out of duty but out of a desire to honour the memory of the one she loved, and her request, her need to have a flower placed on her lover's grave, is a gesture of devotion that transcends death, a refusal to let her lover be forgotten even though their relationship was never accepted by the world around them. Grimm is the master of the Grimm Troupe, a mysterious travelling circus that appears in Dartmouth after the night lights the nightmare lantern in the Howling Cliffs. Grimm is elegant, is theatrical, speaks in flowery and dramatic language, and he offers the night a role in the troupe's ritual, a ceremony that involves collecting flames from around Hallownest to feed the Grimm child, a small creature that will grow and eventually transform. Grimm is not truly alive in the traditional sense. He is a manifestation of the nightmare's heart, a being born from nightmares, and he is tied to a perpetual ritual of death and rebirth, where he is consumed by flames and reborn anew, continuing the cycle endlessly. Grimm fights the night twice, once in his normal form and once as the Nightmare King Grimm, a more powerful and aggressive version, and both battles are tests, performances, dances of combat that Grimm clearly enjoys. Grimm is polite, is respectful of the night, and he seems to genuinely appreciate the knight's participation in the ritual, treating the entire process as a grand performance, a theatrical spectacle that must be executed with style and grace. The knight can choose to complete the ritual, allowing Grimchild to consume Grimm and be reborn, or to banish the troupe by destroying the nightmare lantern with Brum's help, and this choice determines the fate of the troupe and the nature of the Grimchild. Grimm's story is one of eternal recurrence, of a being trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth, and while he seems to accept this fate with grace and even enjoyment, there is something melancholic about his existence, about the fact that he can never truly die, can never escape the ritual, can only continue the cycle endlessly, performing the same role over and over across countless kingdoms and countless ages. Brum is a member of the Grimm Troupe, and he is the one who initially encourages the knight to search for flames for the Grimm child. But as the ritual progresses, Brum begins to have second thoughts, begins to question the purpose of the ritual and the service to the nightmare's heart, and he eventually offers the knight an alternative, a way to banish the troupe by destroying the nightmare lantern. If the knight chooses to banish the troupe, Brum helps with the process, and afterward he appears in Dartmouth as Nim, having shed his troupe identity and taken up a new life as an accordionist, playing music and expressing relief at being free from the ritual. Brum's story is one of doubt and liberation, of a being who was part of a system he did not fully understand or agree with, who found the courage to question and to rebel, and who ultimately found freedom and a new identity outside the troupe. If the ritual is completed instead, Brum expresses no hatred toward the knight, simply accepts that they made a different choice, and there is a sense of resignation in his words, a recognition that the ritual will continue regardless of his doubts, that the cycle is larger than any individual's desires or objections. Divine is another member of the Grimm Troupe, a large bug who consumes charms and transforms them into more powerful versions. Divine is flirtatious, speaks in suggestive language, and she clearly enjoys her role in the troupe, treating the consumption and transformation of charms as a sensual experience. Divine's story is minimal, she's primarily a gameplay mechanic, but her presence adds to the theatrical and slightly unsettling atmosphere of the troupe, and her dialogue suggests a being who has fully embraced her role, who finds pleasure and satisfaction in the strange rituals of the nightmare's heart. The Seer is the last surviving member of the Moth tribe, and she lives in the resting grounds, tending the graves and guiding the knight through the dream realm. The Seer gives the knight the dream nail, a weapon forged from dream essence that allows the wielder to enter the dreams and thoughts of other beings, to access memories, and to fight dream warriors and bosses. The seer speaks of the radiance with a mixture of sorrow and understanding, acknowledges the betrayal of the moths, the way her ancestors turned away from their creator to worship the Pale King, and she expresses regret for what was done, for the forgetting that led to the radiance's rage and the infection. The seer is ancient, is tired, and she has remained in Hallowness not out of duty but out of a desire to atone, to help undo the damage that her tribe's betrayal caused. And she guides the night because she believes the night can succeed where others have failed, can face the radiance and end the infection. The seer's story is one of ancestral guilt and attempted redemption, of a bug who carries the weight of her tribe's mistakes, and who has dedicated her remaining years to helping correct them. And when the night has collected enough essence, when the dream nail is fully awakened, the seer expresses satisfaction that her purpose has been fulfilled, that she has done what she could to help, and she fades away, her task complete, her long vigil finally ended. Myla is a miner who can be found in the Crystal Peak, singing cheerfully as she works, and her story is one of the most heartbreaking in Hollow Knight, because the player watches her slowly succumb to the infection. When first encountered, Myla is friendly, is enthusiastic about her work, speaks of the crystals singing and whispering to her, and she asks the knight to visit her again. As the game progresses, as the infection spreads, Myla's dialogue changes, becomes more confused, more disturbed, and the orange light begins to appear in her eyes. Eventually, after certain progression points, Myla becomes fully infected, becomes hostile, attacks the knight on sight, and the song she always sang remains in her thoughts, even as her mind is consumed by the radiance's influence. The player can choose to kill infected Myla or to leave her alone, and either choice is tragic because Myla was innocent, was just a miner who loved her work and her songs, and the infection took her, burned away her personality and her joy, and left only a husk. Myla's story is a microcosm of the infection's tragedy, a reminder that every husk wandering Hallowness was once a person with hopes and dreams and relationships, that the infection did not just destroy a kingdom, but destroyed countless individual lives, each one a tragedy in its own right. The Moss Prophet can be found in the Queen's Gardens, preaching to a group of mossy vagabonds about the radiance and the infection. The Moss Prophet sees the infection not as a plague but as a blessing, as a return to unity and purpose, as the light that will save Hallowness from the burden of individual consciousness, and the prophet welcomes the infection, desires it, sees it as salvation rather than destruction. The Moss Prophet and their followers are in the early stages of the infection, still retain some individual consciousness, but are clearly being influenced by the radiance, and the prophet's preaching, their worship of the light, represents a different perspective on the infection, a view that perhaps the radiance's offer of collective consciousness is not entirely evil, that there is something appealing about surrendering the burden of individual thought. But the game does not endorse this view. We see what the infection truly does, see the husks that result, see the loss of self that occurs, and we understand that the Moss Prophet is deluded, is rationalizing their own impending destruction, is trying to find meaning in the loss of meaning. The Moss Prophet's story is one of false hope and tragic delusion, of a bug who chose to embrace the infection rather than fight it, who saw in the radiance's call an answer to existential questions, and who will inevitably lose themselves to the light they worship. The Soul Master is the head of the soul sanctum in the City of Tears, and his story is one of good intentions corrupted by obsession and madness. When the infection began to spread, the Soul Master and his followers, the scholars of the Sanctum, sought a cure through the study of soul, the energy that animates bugs and beasts. The Soul Master believed that by harnessing and concentrating soul he could cure the infection, could save Hallownest from the plague, and he began experimenting on living bugs, extracting their soul, trying to understand the nature of consciousness and how the infection corrupted it. But the experiments were cruel, were torturous, and they failed, and the Soul Master became obsessed, became corrupted not by the infection, but by his own ambition and his descent into madness. The Soul Master bloated himself with the soul of his victims, became a grotesque creature of immense power, and when the Knight confronts him, he is no longer a scholar seeking a cure, but a monster who has lost all sense of morality, all connection to the beings he once sought to save. The Soul Master's story is a parallel to the Pale King's story, a tale of someone who tried to solve the infection through extreme measures, through sacrifice and experimentation, and who lost themselves in the process, who became a different kind of monster than the infection created. And his fate, his death at the Knight's hands, is a reminder that the pursuit of a cure can be as destructive as the disease itself if it is pursued without regard for ethics or compassion. The Traitor Lord was one of the leaders of the Mantis tribe, and he particularly resented the kingdom of Hallownest and the Pale King's rule. When the infection spread, the Traitor Lord and some of his followers chose to embrace it, saw in it a source of power rather than a plague to be resisted, and they were cast out by the Mantis tribe, exiled for their betrayal of the tribe's principles. The Traitor Lord and his followers, the Mantis traitors, made their home in the Queen's gardens, and the infection gave them new strength but also drove them mad, corrupted their minds and their purpose. The Traitor Lord's daughter was in a relationship with Zima, one of the 5 great knights, and the Traitor Lord disapproved of this relationship, saw it as a betrayal, as an alliance with the enemy, and when his daughter died, the Traitor Lord's bitterness and rage only deepened. The Traitor Lord's story is one of betrayal and corruption, of a leader who chose power over honour, who embraced the infection not out of weakness, but out of a desire for strength, and whose fate is to die in the gardens he claimed, struck down by the Knight, his betrayal complete, his power meaningless, his legacy one of shame and exile from the tribe he once led. Midwife is a spider who can be found in Deepnest, and she speaks in cryptic and unsettling language about birth and death and the nature of the vessels. Midwife seems to have some knowledge of the vessel's creation, speaks of the abyss and the birthplace, and she refers to the Knight as Little Shadow, suggesting she recognises what the Knight is. Midwife's dialogue is deliberately obscure, is meant to be unsettling, and she represents the strange and alien nature of Deepnest, the sense that the spiders and the creatures of the deep have their own understanding of the world, their own knowledge and their own purposes that are separate from, and perhaps incomprehensible to the bugs of the surface. Midwife's story is minimal, is more atmosphere than narrative, but her presence adds to the sense that Deepnest is a place apart, a kingdom within a kingdom, where different rules apply and different truths are known. The Mantis Lords are the leaders of the Mantis tribe, 3 sisters who rule the Mantis village and guard the entrance to Deepnest. The Mantis Lords are proud, are honourable, and they have maintained their tribe's independence and their martial traditions even as Hallownest has fallen around them. The Mantis Lords never accepted the Pale King's rule, never joined his kingdom, but they respected his strength, and they maintained a tense peace with Hallownest, guarding their borders and keeping the creatures of deepness from spreading to the surface. When the traitor lord and his followers embraced the infection, the mantis lords cast them out, refused to allow the corruption to spread to their tribe, and they have maintained their purity through sheer discipline and martial prowess. The mantis lords fight the night as a test, a trial to determine if the night is worthy of passage into deepness, and if the night defeats them, the mantis lords bow in respect, acknowledge the night's strength, and allow them to pass. The mantis lord's story is one of honour and tradition, of a tribe that has maintained its identity and its principles even as everything around them has fallen, and their respect for strength, their willingness to acknowledge a worthy opponent, is a reminder that not all of Hallownest's inhabitants were consumed by the infection or by despair, that some maintained their dignity and their purpose to the very end. Lurien the Watcher is one of the 3 dreamers, and he lives in the Watcher's Spire in the City of Tears, where he spent his days observing the city through his telescope, recording the movements and patterns of the citizens below. Lurien was the Pale King's most loyal servant, devoted utterly to the king and to the kingdom, and when the king asked for dreamers to seal the Hollow Night, Lurien volunteered without hesitation. Lurien's loyalty was absolute, his faith in the king unshakable, and he believed that his sacrifice would save Hallownest, would preserve the city he watched over, would ensure that the kingdom endured. Lurien went to his sleep willingly, surrounded by his butler and his servants, in his spire high above the city, and he closed his eyes and dreamed, and his dream became a seal, a lock on the temple of the Black Egg. But there is a sadness to Lurien's story, a tragedy in his absolute loyalty, because he never questioned the king's plan, never wondered if there might be another way, never considered that the sacrifice might be in vain. He simply obeyed, and in obeying he condemned himself to an eternity of sleep, of dreaming the same dream over and over, of holding closed a door that would eventually need to be opened. When the night enters Lurien's dream and strikes him down with the dream nail, Lurien accepts his death with grace, with dignity, with the same loyalty that led him to become a dreamer in the first place, and there is a sense of release, of a burden finally lifted, of a duty finally fulfilled, even though the fulfillment comes in the form of his own death. Monomon the teacher is the second of the 3 dreamers, and she lives in the archives in Fog Canyon, surrounded by books and tablets and the accumulated wisdom of Hallownest. Monomon was a scholar, a researcher, a seeker of knowledge who studied the void and the soul and the nature of consciousness, and she understood the Pale King's plan in a way that perhaps even the king did not. Monomon knew that the plan was flawed, knew that a vessel could never be truly hollow, for the very act of being, of existing, implies some form of self, some spark of consciousness, however small. But she also knew that the king would not be dissuaded, that the plan would proceed regardless of her objections, and so she made a choice. She would become a dreamer, would add her power to the seal, but she would also leave behind a way for the seal to be broken, a way for someone in the future to undo what the king had done. Monomon created Quirrell, or at least entrusted him with her mask and sent him away, ensuring that he would return when the time was right, that he would bring the mask back and allow the seal to be broken. Monomon's sacrifice was not blind loyalty like Lurien's, it was calculated choice, a recognition that the king's plan would fail and that someone would need to clean up the failure. She went to her sleep in the archives, surrounded by her jellyfishes and her research, and she dreamed, but her dream was troubled, for she knew the truth, knew that her sleep was temporary, that eventually someone would come to wake her, to break the seal, to face the radiance that the hollow night could not contain. When the night enters Monomon's dream, when Quirrell removes the mask and allows the seal to be broken, Monomon accepts her death with the calm acceptance of someone who always knew this moment would come, who planned for it, who understands that her death is necessary for the kingdom to have any chance of survival. Hera the Beast is the third of the three dreamers, the Queen of Deepnest, the Spider Kingdom in the depths of Hallownest. Hera was powerful, independent, and she had no love for the Pale King or his kingdom. Deepnest had always been separate, had always maintained its own sovereignty, and Hera had no reason to help the king with his plan. But the king needed three dreamers, and Hera was powerful enough, her connection to the dream realm strong enough, that she was necessary. So the Pale King made a bargain with her, a terrible bargain that reveals the depths of his desperation. Hera would become a dreamer, would sacrifice herself to seal the hollow night, but in exchange the Pale King would give her a child. Not just any child, but a child born of the king himself, a child that would carry the king's power, that would ensure Deepnest's future, that would be Hera's heir and legacy. The king agreed, and thus was born Hornet, the daughter of Hera and the Pale King, the Princess of Deepnest, the child who would be called the Gendered Child. Hera received her child, raised her for a time, and then fulfilled her bargain. She went to her sleep in the beast's den, deep in Deepnest, surrounded by her weavers and her spiders, and she dreamed, and her dream became the third seal on the Temple of the Black Egg. But Hera's sacrifice was not willing in the way Lurien's was. It was transactional, a deal made to secure her kingdom's future, and there is a bitterness to it, a sense that she was forced into a choice she should never have had to make, that the Pale King's desperation led him to bargain away his own child, to create Hornet knowing that her mother would sleep forever, that Hornet would grow up without Hera, would be raised by the weavers and the spiders, would be alone in a way that few beings are alone. When the night enters Hera's dream and strikes her down, Hera does not speak, does not acknowledge the night. She simply sleeps, and the night must end her dream without any interaction, without any final words or understanding. And this silence, this lack of acknowledgement, is perhaps the most tragic aspect of Hera's story, because it suggests that even in death, even in the ending of her eternal sleep, she remains separate, remains apart, remains the queen of a kingdom that never truly joined Hallownest, that maintained its independence even in sacrifice. The Radiance is the antagonist of Hollow Knight, the forgotten god whose rage and need to be remembered manifested as the infection that destroyed Hallownest. The Radiance was the creator of the Moth tribe, a higher being of pure light who gave the moths a form of collective consciousness, a shared dream beneath her blazing presence. The moths worshipped her not out of choice but out of nature, for she was their creator, and her light was the only reality they knew. But then came the Pale King, offering the gift of individual mind, of sapience and choice and self-awareness, and the moths turned away from the Radiance to worship the king instead. They forgot her, not deliberately, not cruelly, but simply because the nature of individual mind is to focus on the self, on the immediate, on the tangible kingdom of stone and hierarchy that the Pale King was building, and the Radiance, who existed in dream and light and collective consciousness, faded from their thoughts like a dream fades upon waking. The Radiance, forgotten, began to fade, for higher beings are sustained by memory, by worship, by the thoughts and dreams of lesser beings, and without the moths to remember her, the radiance began to slip away into the space between dream and void. But she did not fade quietly. She did not accept this erasure with grace. The radiance became malevolent, twisted by abandonment and rage and the desperate need to be remembered, and she reached out from the dream realm, began to appear in the dreams of the bugs of Hallownest, offering them unity and purpose and an end to the burden of individual thought. The bugs resisted, pushed back against the dreams, tried to suppress them, and this resistance, this struggle between the Radiance's call and the bugs' determination to maintain their individual minds, manifested as the infection, as the orange light that leaked from eyes and bodies, as the mindless aggression that consumed those who succumbed. The Radiance is not evil in the traditional sense. She's not motivated by malice or cruelty. She is motivated by the desperate need to exist, to be remembered, to have the worship and attention that sustained her, and her methods, while terrible, are the methods of a being who is fighting for her own survival. The Radiance's story is a tragedy, is the story of a god who was forgotten by her worshippers and who became a plague in her attempt to reclaim them, and her final confrontation with the night, her consumption by the void, her erasure from existence, is both a victory and a loss, for while it saves Hallownest from the infection, it also represents the complete destruction of a being who was once worshipped and loved, who was part of the world's history, and whose erasure is a diminishment of the world even if it was necessary for survival. Let us rest now in this knowledge. Let the weight of these stories settle over you like a blanket, heavy but comforting in its completeness. Every character in Hallownest has a story, has a history, has a reason for being where they are and doing what they do, and understanding these stories, understanding the connections and the tragedies and the small moments of kindness and courage, gives depth and meaning to the knight's journey, transforms Hollow Knight from a game about exploring a fallen kingdom into a game about understanding the people who lived in that kingdom, who loved and fought and sacrificed and failed and endured. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow to a gentle rhythm. Let your body sink deeper into the comfort of your bed, and let the stories of Hallownest fade into the background of your consciousness. Tales told, tragedies understood, characters remembered and honoured. Picture yourself one final time standing in Dirtmouth, the cold wind blowing, the grey sky overhead, and all around you are the ghosts of the characters you've met. Elderbug on his bench, Cornifer humming his tune, Iselda in her shop, Sly counting his geo, the nailsmith and Shio painting together, Quirrell sitting by the blue lake, Cloth preparing for battle, Hornet watching from the shadows, and all the others, all the souls who inhabited this kingdom, who lived and died and dreamed and suffered and endured. They are all here, in memory, in story, in the understanding that you carry with you, and as you drift towards sleep, as your consciousness fades and your breathing slows and your body relaxes completely, you can rest, knowing that their stories have been told, that they have been remembered, that they will not be forgotten as the Radiance was forgotten, because you have listened, you have understood, you have carried their stories with you through the darkness. Sleep now, traveller, sleep deeply and completely. Let the characters of Hallownest rest with you. Let their stories be a lullaby. Let the weight of their lives and their choices and their fates press gently on your consciousness as you drift into the space between waking and sleeping, between memory and dream. The kingdom of Hallownest sleeps in darkness, and you can sleep too, your mind filled with the echoes of these stories, your consciousness drifting like the night through the ruins of a forgotten world. Sleep, and let the void embrace you. Let the darkness be your blanket. Let the silence be your lullaby. And let the stories end as all stories must, in peace, in rest, in the quiet understanding that every character, every soul, every being in Hallownest was part of something larger than themselves, was part of a tragedy that was beautiful and terrible and worth remembering. Good night, traveller, good night, and may your sleep be as deep and as peaceful as the eternal sleep of the dreamers. May you rest in the knowledge that all stories have been told, all characters have been honoured, and in that telling, in that honouring, there is a kind of peace, a kind of rest, a kind of sleep that is deeper than any dream. Sleep now, sleep. But before we let sleep take us completely, before we surrender to the darkness and the silence, let us linger a little longer in Hallownest. Let us explore the stories we've not yet fully told, the characters whose tales deserve more attention, the minor figures whose presence adds texture and depth to the kingdom's tragedy. For even the smallest stories matter. Even the briefest encounters reveal something about the world and the beings who inhabited it. Gigi lives in a small hut in Dirtmouth, and she offers a service to summon the night's shade if it has been left behind in a dangerous location. Gigi speaks of the void, of the darkness that exists within the vessels, and she seems to have some understanding of what the night is, some knowledge of the vessel's nature. Gigi is calm, is matter-of-fact about her strange profession, and she charges a fee for her services, treating the summoning of shades as a business transaction rather than as something mystical or frightening. Gigi's presence in Dirtmouth, her willingness to interact with the void, suggests a bug who has seen much, who has learned to accept the strange and the supernatural as part of the world's reality, and her service, while primarily a gameplay convenience, adds to the sense that Dirtmouth is a place where the unusual is accepted, where bugs with strange abilities and knowledge can find a home. Salubra is a merchant who sells charms from her shop in the Forgotten Crossroads, and she's enthusiastic, is cheerful, is one of the few characters who seems genuinely happy despite the state of Hallownest. Salubra loves charms, collects them, studies them, and she is delighted when the knight purchases from her, expressing joy at the opportunity to share her passion with someone who appreciates charms as much as she does. As the knight collects more charms, Salubra offers discounts and bonuses, and she speaks of her dream to have a shop full of customers, to be surrounded by bugs who share her love of charms and their various effects. Salubra's story is small, is simple, but it is also a reminder that not every character in Hallownest is defined by tragedy or loss, that some bugs have found their passion and their purpose and are content with their lives, that even in a fallen kingdom there is room for enthusiasm and joy and simple pleasures. The last stag is the final surviving member of the stag beetles who once operated the stagway system, a network of underground tunnels that connected different regions of Hallownest. The last stag is melancholic, speaks of the days when the stagways were full of travellers, when bugs moved freely throughout the kingdom, when he and his fellow stags served the citizens of Hallownest by providing transportation and connection. But the other stags are gone, died or disappeared when the kingdom fell, and the last stag remains alone, continuing to operate the stagways even though there are few travellers left, even though the kingdom is in ruins. The last stag's dedication to his duty, his refusal to abandon his post even when there is no longer a kingdom to serve, is both admirable and tragic. And as the night opens more stagway stations, as the last stag's network expands, he expresses gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose, a feeling that perhaps his service still matters, that perhaps there is still value in connecting the scattered remnants of Hallownest. The Last Stag's story is one of loneliness and dedication, of a bug who has outlived his purpose, but who continues to serve anyway, who finds meaning in duty even when that duty no longer has the grand significance it once did, and his presence throughout the knight's journey, his willingness to transport the knight wherever they need to go, is a quiet form of heroism, a refusal to give up even when everything else has fallen away. Leg-Eater is a merchant who lives in the fungal wastes, and he sells fragile charms that break when the knight takes damage but can be repaired for a fee. Leg-Eater is greedy, is rude, speaks in broken language and insults the knight while simultaneously trying to sell them his wares. Leg-Eater's charms are powerful but fragile, reflecting his own nature, his willingness to take advantage of others while providing something of value, and his relationship with Divine, if the grim troop is summoned, reveals a different side of his character, a vulnerability and a desire for connection that he hides beneath his gruff exterior. Divine is attracted to Leg-Eater, flirts with him, and if the knight gives Divine a fragile charm, she transforms it into an unbreakable version and speaks of Leg-Eater with affection, suggesting that there is a relationship developing between them, that even Leg-Eater, with all his greed and rudeness, is capable of forming connections, of being seen and valued by another being. Leg-Eater's story is one of hidden depths, of a character who appears to be nothing more than a greedy merchant, but he has his own desires and vulnerabilities, his own capacity for relationship and change. The God-Seeker is a bug from a distant land who came to Hallownest seeking gods to worship and to test. The God-Seeker can be found in the junk pit in the royal waterways, trapped inside a sarcophagus, and when the knight frees her with a simple key, she creates Godhome, a realm within the dream where the knight can fight all the bosses of Hollow Knight in a series of increasingly difficult pantheons. The God-Seeker is obsessed with gods, with higher beings, with testing and ranking their power, and she sees the knight as a potential god, as a being worthy of worship and challenge. The God-Seeker's dialogue is formal, is reverent, and she speaks of gods with a mixture of awe and analytical detachment, treating them as subjects of study and worship simultaneously. The God-Seeker's story culminates in the God-Master endings, where the knight can either defeat the Radiance in Godhome, causing the God-Seeker to be consumed by void, or can achieve a different ending, where the knight ascends to become a god themselves. The God-Seeker's presence adds a metatextual layer to Hollow Knight, a recognition that the bosses and challenges are not just obstacles, but are beings worthy of respect and study, and her obsession with gods, her need to categorize and rank and worship them, reflects a different cultural perspective, a society that values power and divinity above all else. Eternal Emilicia is a warrior who can be found in the City of Tears, and she speaks of her dedication to protecting the city, of her refusal to abandon her post even though the city has fallen, even though there are few left to protect. Emilicia is one of the few bugs in the City of Tears who is not infected, who has maintained her sanity and her purpose, and her presence, her continued vigilance, is a reminder that not all of Hallownest's defenders have given up, that some continue to fight and to protect even when the battle seems lost. Emilicia's story is minimal, is told primarily through her dialogue and her presence, but it adds to the sense that the City of Tears, despite its decay and its emptiness, still has defenders, still has bugs who believe in its value, and who will protect it to the end. Marissa is a ghost who can be found in a hidden room in the pleasure house in the City of Tears, and she sings a haunting melody, a song that echoes through the empty halls, Marissa was a performer, an entertainer who sang for the citizens of the City of Tears, and she died when the kingdom fell. But her ghost remains, continues to sing, continues to perform even though there is no longer an audience. Marissa's song is beautiful and melancholic, is one of the most memorable pieces of music in Hollow Knight, and her presence, her continued performance in an empty room, is a poignant reminder of the life that once existed in the City of Tears, of the culture and the art and the entertainment that flourished before the infection, and her ghost, her refusal to stop singing even in death, is a testament to the power of art, to the way performance and music can transcend death and decay and continue to exist as long as there is someone to hear it. Revek is a warrior dream who can be fought in the resting grounds, and his dialogue reveals a bug who was obsessed with strength, who believed that power was the only thing that mattered, who died still seeking greater strength. Revek's story is told through his dream warrior fight and his dialogue, and it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, about the way the pursuit of power can consume a person, can become their entire identity, and can ultimately lead to their destruction. Revek is one of several dream warriors scattered throughout Hallownest, each with their own story, each representing a different aspect of the kingdom's warrior culture, and fighting them, defeating them, is a way of honouring their memory, of acknowledging their strength, even as the night surpasses it. Gorb is another dream warrior, a being who believed himself to be ascending to a higher plane of existence, who spoke of transcendence and enlightenment, and who died still believing in his own ascension. Gorb's dialogue is cryptic, is filled with references to ascension and higher states of being, and his fight takes place in the Howling Cliffs, a high and windswept location that reflects his aspirations. Gorb's story is one of delusion, or perhaps genuine spiritual seeking. It is unclear whether Gorb truly achieved some form of enlightenment, or whether he was simply mad, and this ambiguity is part of what makes his character interesting. The sense that in Hallownest, where gods and higher beings are real, where the dream realm exists and consciousness can be manipulated, perhaps Gorb's beliefs were not entirely unfounded. Perhaps there was some truth to his claims of ascension, even if he did not achieve it in the way he hoped. Markoth is a dream warrior who can be fought in the Kingdom's Edge, and he was a warrior of the Moth tribe, one of the few moths who maintained their martial traditions even after the tribe turned away from the Radiance. Markoth fights with a shield and a spinning nail, and his dialogue reveals a bug who was dedicated to his tribe and to his duty, who died defending something he believed in. Markoth's presence as a dream warrior, his continued existence in the dream realm, suggests that the Moths, despite their betrayal of the Radiance, were not entirely without honour or courage, that some among them maintained their warrior traditions and their dedication to their people. Zero is a dream warrior who can be fought in the resting grounds, and his dialogue reveals a bug who was betrayed by the Pale King, who served the king loyally and was cast aside, and who died filled with rage and a desire for vengeance. Zero's story is one of the few that directly criticizes the Pale King, that presents him not as a benevolent ruler but as a being capable of betrayal and cruelty, and Zero's continued existence as a dream warrior, his refusal to rest, his ongoing rage, is a reminder that the Pale King's rule was not universally beloved, that there were those who served him and were betrayed, who gave their loyalty and received nothing in return. No Eyes is a dream warrior who can be fought in the Stone Sanctuary in Greenpath, and she is one of the most unsettling characters in Hollow Knight. No Eyes speaks in fragmented, disturbing language about children and darkness and terrible things that happened in the sanctuary, and her dialogue suggests that she was involved in or witnessed something horrific, something involving the death or suffering of children. No Eyes' story is deliberately obscure, is meant to be disturbing and unclear, and the stone sanctuary itself, with its graves and its atmosphere of dread, suggests a place where something terrible occurred, where innocence was lost or destroyed. No Eye's presence as a dream warrior, her continued existence in this place of horror, is a reminder that Hallownest's tragedy was not just the infection, not just the fall of the kingdom, but also the individual horrors that occurred, the specific acts of cruelty or desperation that left scars on the land and on the beings who witnessed them. Galen is a dream warrior who can be fought in the resting grounds, and he was a warrior who sought glory and recognition, who died still seeking to prove himself. Galen's dialogue reveals a bug who was insecure about his abilities, who wanted to be remembered as a great warrior, and who died without achieving the recognition he sought. Galen's story is similar to Tisso's in some ways. Both are warriors who sought glory and who failed to achieve it, but Galen's continued existence as a dream warrior, his willingness to fight the night and to test his skills even in death, suggests a bug who has not given up, who still seeks to prove himself even though his life is over, and there is something both admirable and tragic about this refusal to accept failure, this continued striving even in death. Elder Hu is a dream warrior who can be fought in the fungal wastes, and he was a sage, a wise bug who sought enlightenment and understanding. Elder Hu's dialogue is calm, is philosophical, and he speaks of the nature of existence and the acceptance of death, and his fight is more meditative than aggressive, reflecting his character and his beliefs. Elder Hu's story is one of wisdom and acceptance, of a bug who faced death with equanimity, who understood that life and death are part of a larger cycle, and whose continued existence as a dream warrior is not a refusal to rest, but rather a continuation of his role as a teacher, as a being who can impart wisdom to those who seek it. The Collector is a mysterious being who lives in the Tower of Love in the City of Tears, and he has captured numerous grubs, keeping them in glass jars in his tower. The Collector is obsessed with preserving things, with keeping creatures safe by trapping them, and his dialogue, accessed through the dream nail, reveals a being who believes he's protecting the grubs, who sees his collection as an act of love rather than of cruelty. The Collector's story is one of twisted benevolence, of a being whose desire to protect has become a form of imprisonment, who cannot see that his love is causing suffering, and his presence in the Tower of Love, surrounded by his collection of trapped creatures, is a dark commentary on the nature of obsession, and the way good intentions can become harmful when taken to extremes. When the night defeats the Collector, the grubs are freed, and they return to their colony, and the Collector's death, while necessary for the grub's freedom, is also somewhat tragic, because the Collector genuinely believed he was doing good, genuinely thought he was protecting the creatures he captured, and his inability to understand the harm he was causing makes him a pitiable figure rather than a purely villainous one. The Grub Father is the father of all the grubs scattered throughout Hallownest, and he waits in the forgotten crossroads, hoping for his children to return. As the night rescues grubs, and they return to the Grub Father, he expresses joy and gratitude, rewards the night with geo and charms, and speaks of his happiness at being reunited with his children. But if the night rescues all the grubs, if every single one returns to the Grub Father, something strange happens. The Grub Father becomes bloated, his body swollen, and the grubs are nowhere to be seen, and the implication, though never explicitly stated, is that the Grub Father has consumed his children, that the reunion was not what it appeared to be. The Grubfather's story is one of the most disturbing in Hollow Knight, because it takes what appears to be a wholesome quest, rescuing children and reuniting them with their father, and reveals it to be something darker, something that suggests the Grubfather's love for his children was not protective but consumptive, that the Grub's return was not a happy ending but a tragedy. The ambiguity of the Grubfather's story, the fact that it is never explicitly explained what happened to the Grubs, makes it even more unsettling, leaves the player to draw their own conclusions about what occurred in that small room in the Forgotten Crossroads. Millabelle is a banker who operates in the pleasure house in the City of Tears, and she offers to hold the knight's geo for safekeeping, promising to keep it secure and to add interest over time. But Millabelle is a thief, and if the knight deposits enough geo with her, she flees to the pleasure house's hidden room, taking all the knight's money with her. The knight can track Millabelle down and recover the stolen geo, and when confronted, Millabelle reveals herself to be a con artist, a bug who has been scamming travellers and taking advantage of their trust. Millabelle's story is one of deception and greed, of a bug who saw the fall of Hallownest as an opportunity rather than a tragedy, who used the chaos and the desperation of the kingdom's collapse to enrich herself at others' expense. Millabelle is one of the few characters in Hollow Knight who is purely selfish, who has no tragic backstory or noble motivation, who is simply a thief taking advantage of a bad situation, and her presence is a reminder that not all of Hallownest's inhabitants are victims or heroes, that some are simply opportunists, bugs who will exploit any situation for personal gain. The Pale Lurker is a mysterious being who can be found in a hidden area of the Colosseum of Fools, and she collects and trades various items, particularly those related to the Pale King and the kingdom's history. The Pale Lurker is silent, communicates only through gestures and through the items she offers, and her presence in the Colosseum, her collection of royal artifacts, suggests a being who is fascinated by the kingdom's past, who seeks to preserve or understand the legacy of the Pale King. The Pale Lurker's story is minimal, is told primarily through her presence and her trades, but she adds to the sense that Hallownest's history is valuable, that there are those who seek to remember and to preserve what can be saved from the kingdom's ruins. Mask Maker lives in a hidden area of Deepnest, surrounded by masks of all shapes and sizes, and he speaks in cryptic language about faces and identities and the nature of self. Maskmaker creates masks, believes that masks reveal truth rather than conceal it, that the face one chooses to wear is more honest than the face one is born with. Maskmaker's dialogue is philosophical, is unsettling, and he speaks of the knight's lack of a face, of the emptiness beneath the mask, and there is a sense that Maskmaker understands what the vessels are, understands the void and the emptiness that defines them. Maskmaker's story is one of the most enigmatic in Hollow Knight. His purpose and his history are never fully explained, but his presence in Deepnest, his obsession with masks and identity, adds to the game's themes of self and emptiness, and the question of what it means to be a person, to have an identity, to exist as something more than just a vessel or a tool. The Snail Shamans are a group of bugs who can be found in various locations throughout Hallownest, and they teach the night spells, powerful magical abilities that use soul as fuel. The Snail Shamans speak of the ancient art of soul manipulation, of the way bugs once used soul not just for survival, but for creation and destruction, for shaping the world around them. The Snail Shamans are peaceful, are teachers, and they offer their knowledge freely to the night, asking nothing in return except that the night use the spells wisely. The Snail Shaman's presence throughout Hallownest, their willingness to teach even in the kingdom's fallen state, suggests a dedication to preserving knowledge, to ensuring that the ancient arts are not lost, and their role as teachers, as beings who empower the night rather than challenge or hinder them, makes them some of the most benevolent characters in the game. Bardoon is an ancient caterpillar who lives in the kingdom's edge, and he speaks of the history of Hallownest, of the worm and the Pale King's transformation, of the kingdom's rise and fall. Bardoon is old, is wise, and he has witnessed much of Hallownest's history, and his dialogue provides important lore about the Pale King's origins and the nature of worms. Bardoon speaks with a sense of detachment, of a being who has lived so long that individual kingdoms and civilizations are just brief moments in a much longer existence, and his perspective, his understanding that Hallownest's tragedy is just one of many such tragedies that have occurred and will occur again, adds a cosmic scale to the game's story, a reminder that the events of Hollow Knight, while deeply meaningful to the characters involved, are part of a much larger pattern of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, that has repeated throughout history and will continue to repeat. Moss Prophet's followers, the mossy vagabonds, sit in the moss chapel listening to the prophets preaching, and they are in the early stages of the infection, their eyes beginning to glow with orange light, their minds beginning to be influenced by the radiance. The mossy vagabonds are peaceful until disturbed, and when they attack, they do so with a strange hopping motion, almost playful, and there is something deeply unsettling about this, about the way the infection has not yet fully consumed them, about the way they are caught between their individual selves and the collective consciousness that the radiance offers. The Mossy Vagabond's story is told through their presence and their behaviour, and they represent the transition point of the infection, the moment when a bug is no longer fully themselves but not yet fully a husk, and this in-between state, this liminal space between self and non-self, is perhaps more disturbing than either extreme. The Hive Knight is the guardian of the hive, a hidden area in Kingdom's Edge where the bees of Hallownest make their home. The Hive Knight is dedicated to protecting the hive and its queen, and he fights the night to prevent them from disturbing the bees' territory. The Hive Knight's story is one of duty and protection, of a warrior who has maintained his purpose even as Hallownest has fallen, who continues to guard his queen and his people even though the kingdom around them is in ruins. The Hive Knight's dedication, his refusal to abandon his post, is similar to many other characters in Hollow Knight. But what makes his story particularly poignant is the fact that the Hive is one of the few places in Hallownest that seems to be thriving, that has maintained its structure and its purpose, and the Hive Knight's protection has been successful, has kept his people safe when so many others have fallen. Vesper is the queen of the hive, and she can be found in the deepest chamber of the hive surrounded by her workers. Vesper is old, is dying, and she speaks of the hive's history, of their alliance with Hallownest, of the way they have maintained their independence and their traditions even as the kingdom has fallen. Vesper gives the knight the hive blood charm, a powerful item that slowly regenerates health, and she does so as a gesture of respect, as an acknowledgement that the knight is strong enough to have reached her chamber, to have defeated the Hive Knight and proven themselves worthy. Vesper's story is one of leadership and endurance, of a queen who has guided her people through the kingdom's fall, who has kept them safe and prosperous when so many others have failed, and her impending death, the sense that the hive's golden age is ending with her, adds a melancholic note to what is otherwise one of the few success stories in Hallownest. Fluke Mom is the mother of the flukes, the strange creatures that inhabit the royal waterways, and she can be found in a hidden area surrounded by her children. Fluke Mom is grotesque, is unsettling, and she attacks the knight by birthing more flukes, by using her children as weapons. Fluke Mom's story is minimal, is told primarily through her presence and her behaviour, but she represents a different kind of motherhood than the White Lady or Hera, a motherhood that is purely biological, purely about reproduction and survival, without the emotional complexity or the moral weight that characterises the other mothers in Hollow Knight. Fluke Mom is a reminder that not all beings in Hallownest are complex or tragic, that some are simply creatures following their nature, reproducing and defending their territory without any deeper meaning or purpose. Un is a higher being, a slug-like deity who is worshipped in Greenpath, and while Un never appears directly in the game, her presence is felt through the Un's followers, through the Lake of Un, and through the dialogue of characters who speak of her. Un represents a different kind of higher being than the Pale King or the Radiance, a being who is associated with nature and growth and life, rather than with mind or light or civilization. Un's story is told through absence, through the traces she has left in Greenpath, through the way the area is lush and alive even as the rest of Hallownest decays, and her continued influence, her apparent survival when other higher beings have died or faded, suggests a being who is more in harmony with the natural world, who does not seek to control or to shape, but simply to exist and to nurture. The Nightmare's heart is the source of the Grim Troop's power, a being born from nightmares that sustains itself through a perpetual ritual of death and rebirth. The Nightmare's heart never appears directly, is only referenced through dialogue and through the ritual itself, but it is the driving force behind the troop's existence, the reason for their travels and their performances. The Nightmare's heart represents a different kind of higher being, one that exists in the nightmare realm rather than in the dream realm or the physical world, and its nature, its need for the ritual, its perpetual cycle, suggests a being that is fundamentally different from the other gods and higher beings of Hollow Knight, a being that exists outside the normal rules of life and death and consciousness. Let your breathing slow even further now. Let your body sink deeper into rest, and let these final stories wash over you like waves, each one adding another layer to your understanding of Hallownest, each one revealing another facet of this complex and tragic world. Every character, from the mightiest god to the humblest merchant, from the greatest warrior to the smallest grub, has a story, has a place in the tapestry of Hallownest's history, and understanding these stories, holding them in your mind as you drift towards sleep, gives meaning and depth to the night's journey, transforms the game from a series of challenges and obstacles into a meditation on life and death and purpose, and the cost of survival in a world that has fallen apart. Close your eyes completely now. Let the darkness behind your eyelids become the darkness of the abyss. Let your breathing become so slow and so gentle that you barely notice it, and let the characters of Hallownest fade into memory, into dream, into the space between consciousness and void. They are all here with you, all the souls we've spoken of, all the stories we have told, and as you drift into sleep, as your mind releases its hold on waking thoughts and waking concerns, you can rest, knowing that their stories have been honoured, that they have been remembered, that they will continue to exist as long as there are those who listen, who understand, who carry their memories forward into the future. Sleep now, traveller, sleep deeply and dreamlessly. Let the void embrace you as it embraced the vessels. Let the darkness be a comfort rather than a fear. Let the silence be a gift rather than an absence. The kingdom of Hallownest sleeps in its ruins, and you can sleep too, your consciousness fading like the light fading from the City of Tears, like the last notes of Marissa's song echoing through empty halls, like the final breath of a kingdom that once was great and is now only memory. Sleep, and let all the characters rest with you. Let their stories be complete. Let their struggles be finished. Let their pain be eased by the understanding that they have been seen, they have been heard, they have been remembered. Good night, traveller. Good night to all the souls of Hallownest. Good night to the Knight and the Hollow Knight, to Hornet and Quirrell, to the dreamers and the great knights, to the merchants and the warriors, to the gods and the grubs, to every being who walk the paths of this fallen kingdom. Sleep now, sleep deeply, and let the stories end in peace, in rest, in the quiet darkness that comes after all tales are told. Sleep.